Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the May 18th, 2022 Worcester Township Board of Supervisors business meeting. Would you please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? My name is Rick DiLello. I'm the chairman of the board. To my left is Lou Betts, who's our vice chair. To my right is Steve Quigley, who's our third member. Over on the side table, we have Bob Brandt, our solicitor, and Joe Nolan, our township engineer, as well as Tommy Ryan, our township manager, at the back table. First and foremost, does anybody have any informational items for the board tonight?
This evening's meeting is being video recorded for rebroadcast.
Thank you, Tommy. I actually have two small informational items as well. First is that since our last meeting, the township had the opportunity, we won a governor's award at the end of April for fiscal responsibility, and it pertained to sort of our funding, dealing with an insolvent sort of sewer fund, and over several years how we sort of capitalized and got that on track, and we were recognized by the Commonwealth for that. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to go out to Harrisburg to accept that. So that's certainly a testament for our staff and for all of the hard work that they do. So I want to recognize that. And then also, Steve, Lou, and I all had the opportunity to attend the PSATS conference out in Hershey, which was also, since our last meeting, it's just an opportunity for all of the, its township staff, its township supervisors, its solicitors from all across the Commonwealth who have the opportunity to meet for a couple of days in Hershey. Always a great opportunity for us to meet not just other supervisors from Montgomery and Chester and Bucks County, but really from all across the state, and gives us an opportunity to get some perspective. So that's what I have. Moving on the agenda, the first item is public comment. We do ask that you limit your public comment to 5 minutes. Does anybody have any public comment for the board this evening? Maeve? Do I have to sign in still? Yes, you do. Great. And we just ask that you speak into the mic so that we get you on the recording, since we are videotaping.
Maeve Vogan, Dell Road, Worcester. So I saw on the agenda that Stacy had left. I just want to tell you guys how much I appreciated Stacy being there, being able to help us. She was a great asset, and I hope that you find someone of the same caliber to replace her, because I think you need it. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Maeve. We appreciate your comments. Does anybody else have any public comment for the board this evening?
Name is Bob Fesnack. I live at 2203 Alabac Lane, Worcester, PA. Just want to give you an update. I know I spoke before on the open space referendum question, and I just want to give an update to the board. So yesterday at the polls, myself and some volunteers had gone to get some signatures on a petition asking them with regard to how they felt about asking for a referendum in the November ballot for an open space fund. I have the original signatures here, which I'll leave with you when I'm done my talk here. Feel free to take a look at it. But I first just want to read the wording on it. You can read it for yourself, but I figure I'd put it into the records. And then I'd like to just talk about sort of the results that we had, It says, "We, the undersigned voters of Worcester Township, request that an open space referendum be submitted to Worcester residents on the November 2022 election ballot. The referendum would allow voters to decide if they want a dedicated open space fund and a related funding source. The sole purpose of such funds would be to acquire land, development rights, and to maintain parks and recreational areas." So we had 21 volunteers who would, as they exited, the voters exited the polls, we would ask for their signature and explain the petition. We ended up with 947 signatures. Not a bad day's worth of work, I would think. What I found very interesting was, of the people we spoke to, because we only had one person at each polling site on a given time, and so we couldn't get to everybody, obviously. But of the people we spoke to, 95% roughly signed our petition, which I just found incredible. What that tells me is, sort of a numbers game. The more people you talk to, the more signatures you're getting at a very high rate. It also says to me that if we couple the resident survey from, I guess, about a year ago, that survey, which put open space as a top priority, with getting 947 signatures in one day at one site, with a very high percentage close rate, so to speak, I just think it speaks, enormously about the concern and the support for an open space referendum in the fall. I think the residents want to have their say and be able to vote on it. And in fact, when we spoke to them, not only were they very supportive, obviously, of the petition because they signed it, but they were also very supportive of the open space program, a dedicated fund for open space. What that tells me also is that in the fall, we have a very high success rate opportunity. They were, virtually all of them were very much in favor of some type of dedicated funding source. So just giving you some feedback on who we talked to, what the thoughts were. We had, at least I personally, when I was at Bethel, but I personally did not have any real concerns coming from the residents with regard to timing or the economy. That question did not come up, and I had 280 signatures at Bethel. So out of 280 people, that was not a non-issue. So I guess, in closing, I would hope that the wishes of the residents and the voters is fulfilled. They are clear, no matter how you look at it, whether it's surveys, petitions, talking to your neighbors, that they would like to have the board put on the November ballot a referendum allowing them to have their say with regard to an open space funding source. Thank you very much.
Question, how many total voters were in the election?
What was that?
The total votes cast?
Total
How many voters voted at the 4 polling spots?
Looking at some of the statistics today, and again, I'm not an expert at looking at, there's a lot of numbers in some of those.
Well, if you add up how many votes.
About 2,100.
How many?
I think it was around 2,100. So we had about 43 to 45% of the total in-person, not mail-in, obviously, in-person voters was about 2,100. So we had roughly about 43, 45% of the in-person voters in all 4 locations, which again, considering our manpower problem of just having one person, I thought that was pretty good. I don't know. That's a personal comment.
Did you have a unified message to all the people? Were all the people saying the same thing at all the polling places?
I wasn't at all of them, but I can tell you that prior to them going, we met and we went over what the wording would be and what we're asking for. We're not asking for them to vote. We were only asking for them to sign a petition allowing them to vote in the fall. They have until November to make a decision once they get more data from obviously the board.
I voted at Bethel as well, and I did it about 6:30 at night. And I was approached by the fellow. After I heard the speech he gave to the person in front of me, talking about the funds being used to stop the Palmer project. And I came out, and he asked me to sign the petition. And I said, if I come anywhere near that petition, based on what I just heard, if the court finds that out, that these people are being told that this money could be used to, you know, the Palmers are trying to do this or that, and the other thing on their property, could be a real problem.
I agree with that. I mean,
That's
so
why
you're-
I'm asking
just so
you.
I'm clear.
What's that?
Steve, so when you were asked in the
I overheard
discussion
the,
that-
I overheard the
you overheard.
conversation as it was voting. I stood by the doorway listening to the sales pitch that the 3 people in front of me received. They all did sign the petition.
Right.
And I went in and out, and he knew me, and he said something about it. And I said, you know, I can't do that.
Right.
It's a real problem
But
for
they
me,
were
it's my
saying the
position.
purpose was for the Palmer project?
Well, a combination of open space, and, you know, the Palmers have they're trying to change the zoning there on a commercial site, and we can use the fund for a multitude of purposes. That can be a little misleading and can cause some problems later on. I say that because I know that the legal team that representing the Palmer also live in the township. And if they were hit with the same thing at their polling place, I'm worried about jeopardizing the whole process here.
Right.
You know, we certainly know it's going to be a problem. It'll be a long problem, and we have to make sure we keep a objective, clean, professional view of this, and we can't get it skewed by getting people, I guess, the misinformation.
I agree 100%. I was asked by a couple residents, oh, is this for the Palmer property? And my answer was, no, that's a separate issue. This is a future-looking fund that over the umpteen years into the future, we're going to be able to have a dedicated fund to buy up properties or rights, but it has nothing to do with the Palmer property. They're both properties issues, but this is not for that. And I was clear that it was really more for the future because it's going to be a fund that builds up. I mean, unless you do a bond, you're not going to have a lot of money, you know, coming out of the gate, right? So it'll build and we'll be able to use it in the future for other uses, all related to the open space issue.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bob. Is there anybody-
Rick, should I?
You could just leave that, yeah, that's fine. You can just leave it right up on there is fine. Thank you, Bob. Does anybody else have any public comment for the board? Jeremy, and then I'll get to you, John, just.
Good evening, Jeremy Quinn, Windy Hill Road, Worcester, PA. I just have a couple items for comment tonight. One is directly related to last month's meeting, and there was an agenda item where Supervisor Betts made a motion to appoint Bell Kelly LLP Special Counsel. The motion was seconded by Supervisor Quigley. So it was pretty clear that that was for.
Jeremy, can I just interrupt for a second? You know, the older I get, the deafer I get. If you could just slow down a little bit when you speak. I grew up close to Philadelphia, and I ramble, but
I ramble, I know.
I know. If you just slow down so the people in the back can hear you as well.
So at last month's meeting, there was a motion. Supervisor Betts made a motion to appoint Bell Kelly LLP Special Counsel. The motion was seconded by Supervisor Quigley. I think it was really clear at that meeting that that motion was for an employee matter that couldn't be discussed, right?
Do you want to touch this one, Bob? I mean, the short answer is yes.
We don't comment on personnel matters.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. So I'm just clarifying that it was a personnel matter, because after the meeting, when Mr. Supervisor Quigley came outside, and I didn't ask the question, I just happened to be there, a resident made a comment to Supervisor Quigley to say, what are you doing appointing a special forensic lawyer for? And Supervisor Quigley said, oh, I thought that was for the road improvement project. So now I'm really confused and need some explanation of, like, are we making motions as supervisors that we're really not sure what those agenda items are for? Just some clarification.
Jerry, we can't talk.
Sure, Amy. Wait, let me answer that.
Okay.
Wait, you can't talk about a motion that a
Just hold
supervisor
on.
thinks is for.
Hold
an
on,
appropriate-
Jeremy. Hold on.
Let me help you out. I walked outside the meeting and there were 4 guys there. I never said it was for a road improvement. Maybe I mumble. So as you spoke very clearly, I'll speak very clearly. You folks said that apparently the person was hired for a forensic audit. And I said, where'd you get that idea from?
Steve, you said, oh, I thought that was for the road improvement project.
No,
And there
no,
were
no,
4
no,
gentlemen there, so if I need to get them to come back and confirm that, I will.
No, it was not for a road improvement project.
Well, you thought it was. That's what your
No,
answer
no.
was. Oh, I thought
You guys
that-
were telling me, and I said, as I walked away, I'm not sure where you guys got that information from, that it was forensic audit. How do you guys know he's a forensic audit guy? We presented the information, we presented that information at the meeting that night, okay? Where was the research done?
I'm good, thank you. I'll move on to my next comment.
Well, I'm just
I know
asking a
what you said.
question.
Thank
Where
you.
was the research done for the group of people to come up that we were doing a forensic audit in 15-minute time frame? Someone let the cat out of the bag. I guess that's the answer.
No, the question was that you thought it was for a road improvement project. and
No,
that's
it's not for
exactly
road
what you said.
improvements.
That's exactly what you said. I thought they were for a road improvement project, so I was really confused. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy.
My second comment is in relation to an email, multiple emails that were sent over the past 4 to 5 days regarding signs and signs on private property. So regardless of if, everybody knows that I ran for a position, regardless if I lost or won that position, I would have been here making the exact same comments. Because this has nothing to do with campaigning, elections, or anything but the rights of our residents who own private property in this township. And what happened was, those residents who own private property made a very clear decision that they didn't want certain signs on their property. Those signs were removed by the residents. Someone came back and put the exact same signs on private property, but affixed them to traffic signs. Took zip ties on the same private property where our residents who have rights for their private property decided we don't want these signs on our private property. Someone came back to those same properties and zip-tied signs to traffic signs on those properties. Now, there's a very specific regulation or ordinance or something in Worcester Township that says you can't affix signs to other signs. This was so inappropriate to do to our residents, to have our residents who own private property make a decision they don't want these signs on their property, and have someone come back and say, well, I'm not going to put them on private property, I'm going to affix them to a traffic sign, so I'm good. And to have them stay there for 4+ days and not be removed is a real concern of mine, and it should have been something that was addressed immediately. This has nothing to do with campaigning or elections. This has to do with the rights of our residents who own private property in Worcester Township, and different residents being treated differently with these signs. Because I know other residents who put signs up, and after 10 days have gotten letters to say, in 20 days, if you don't remove that sign, you're going to get this action taken. I know other signs that have been up for more than 30 days, and the regulation or the ordinance specifically says signs can only be up for 30 days. So in some places, signs are being left up for more than 30 days, and other places, people are getting letters about signs being removed, and it's just not fair to our residents to not be treating this fairly across the board. Thank you very much.
Hold on, Tommy, can you address that sign issue? I mean, I don't want to sit here and have people come and make comments and not get it clear as to the ordinance and what's happening with that.
Which sign issue?
Well, the signs Jeremy's referring to.
Well, there are two. There's one about general temporary signs, and then the temporary political signs.
Well, the signs where they're attached. He's saying that people.
Sure. As we always do with enforcement issues, we're consistent. So when we receive a request to take a look at a sign that's improperly posted, we follow up, usually within a business day. And in this instance, that is what has happened. I contacted the person who I know to be the one posting the signs, and I said, please address. And that person said, will do. I got an email back saying I took a look at the code that was cited, and the code references traffic signs, and that's correct. You cannot affix a temporary sign to a traffic sign, but there wasn't anything in there with regards to street signs. So the signs were to be removed from all the traffic signs in accordance with the code, and I believe some were relocated to street signs. All of these, of course, being in the right-of-way. It's the same process we follow for everybody. By the letter of the law, we could always cite somebody on day one. We haven't done that in 7 years. We'll always send out a polite ask, reminding people of the code and to follow the code. There's another candidate in this room right now who had a sign posted on township property, treated the same way. Hey, when you get a chance, can you go out and remove it? That was on township property. I could have taken it off the property immediately, thrown it in the trash can. But I know these signs are pricey. We try to do the neighborly thing, and that's what we did.
So my comment to that is that the candidate who had the sign posted on private or public property did receive an email communication to remove the sign. It was very professional, it was appropriate, and I think the sign was dealt with in a timely manner. The other instance, I was told that the person was spoken to. So it's not equal treatment, because one candidate got an email and another candidate was spoken to. And the one who was spoken to, the sign stayed up for 4 days. So my final comment is I really think we need to look at that ordinance or that regulation, because if it only says traffic signs, it might need to say street signs also. When I'm driving down Valley Forge Road and there's a little red diamond on the side of the road that identifies a merge lane to identify the lane's going to end, I consider that a traffic sign.
Sure. So,
And I also consider a street sign that identifies a road a traffic sign. All those signs are in place to control traffic, so drivers know where to go to avoid problems. So maybe that might need to be updated from traffic sign to include street signs if...
so Jeremy, I'm going to
Sure, thank you.
I hear you. So we've all run campaigns. We have all run into scenarios. This is the first time I've ever seen anyone affix to a street sign. And there are mechanics, and Bob, we don't need to go down the rabbit hole with Bob, but we went through, I think it was 3 years ago, where we updated the temporary sign, or updated the sign ordinance and a whole section on the temporary, so we tried to capture everything. You know, so then you turn around and you realize there's a scenario that potentially you didn't capture. And if we had taken and removed somebody's sign, and Bob can attest to this, if there's a challenge, if we didn't specifically designate or delineate that a street sign was different than a traffic sign, then the individual would have the opportunity to appeal to our zoning. I mean, we would wind up with a bigger problem than intended. But to your point, the elections tend to get emotional. We've all had signs stolen. We've all had signs moved. I mean, it's a delicate area. We try to manage it consistently, but we certainly can look to make sure that we've covered proper scenarios. You know, we encountered some different scenarios here and say, okay, we got to go back. We do a cleanup ordinance typically a couple times a year that you make sure you say, all right, well, let's get that squared away. Let's get that taken care of so that it doesn't happen going forward. Look, it would be ideal if, you know, every election sort of had the same consistency to it, but some of them tend to be better or worse than others. I mean, but the long and the short of it is I can certainly empathize with it. I can empathize if a resident has a sign put on their property and they can take it and put it in the trash. Absolutely. They shouldn't, as an individual resident, private property, if you don't want a sign there, you shouldn't have to have a sign there. You shouldn't have to have any sort of situation where somebody's putting that in place. And certainly we want to make efforts to make sure that we have our ordinance tight to do that. I can tell you temporary signs are a huge challenge in terms of just how you deal with them relative. We had to make changes. Was it a Supreme Court case, Bob, that kind of drove us to have to change, again, dealing with something on a federal level? But the long and the short is I hear what you're saying. We all hear it's unfortunate when that happens. In areas that we can correct that, we should, and I think we will, and we can do that. And certainly, you know, going forward, we don't want that type of a situation to happen. But we also want to try to make sure we're not getting into the mix of treating one different than the other. We always try hard not to do that, and certainly I respect your comments on that.
Thank you very much. My final comment is I still have signs out there. I was in the middle of collecting them today at 2:30 in the afternoon when Worcester Fire Company got called to skip back. So I was there for 4.5 hours. I came right from there, took a shower to here. So I will get my signs finally collected, the rest of them tomorrow, but I'm about halfway done right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
A follow-up to that question, Jeremy. You weren't around, but we had a real sign problem in the township probably 12 years ago, 15 years ago, where we had, and this is why we run it through the manager. It's not our duty or the manager's responsibility to go on people's property and remove someone's personal property. Mr. Ryan said, the signs aren't cheap, they're $5, $7. It all adds up after a while. But the problem is we had township officials thinking it was their right to go onto businesses' property or a homeowner's property and take signs down, and actually got into a confrontation where a sitting supervisor got into a struggle with a business owner over signs on his property. So it's something, it's an issue. It's tough to address. You try not to be mean to everybody, but it's a situation, the signs are a problem. And you brought an interesting thing up. You brought about signs, and I'll address I guess the problem, the elephant in the room right now are the signs that Mr. Ryan, and once again, they asked for a law. A certain group of people wanted a sign ordinance because they didn't want all the trash around the township. So we have a sign ordinance. And I guess it's responsibility of the township to enforce the sign ordinance. Mr. Ryan was poked about the red signs around the township about giving. And once again, I'm the worst one to complain about things like that. But I have to sit here as a supervisor and address the problems. So these signs are around there saying, do we give, donate, whatever the signs say. We were told they were in violation by legal counsel, and Mr. Ryan did the right thing. He sent the letter out informing the people. We didn't go around, yank the signs, and go back and tell them again. The problem from the supervisor standpoint, as we see it, or I see it now, it's happening is we are allowing those signs to stay there because we didn't take further action. We sent the first notice out. We didn't follow up with a second notice or a third notice. So what happens when this all stuff comes to court, what's going to happen, you have to understand, we sort of can read the tea leaves, what's happening. When this thing gets drugged in the court, the opposing team's going to say, Worcester Board of Supervisors didn't act in the right way. They didn't enforce the code. They were very generous to the opposition, allowing them to raise funds and promote their situation that's going on. So that's, it's a tricky situation when you start trying to enforce a sign law. And we sit here, you go like this, you really don't see it, you let it go. But it will be addressed, I'm sure, at some point by a lawyer for the opposition. So that's something, if we have to send another letter out, it has to come out to protect the township from, just as you brought it up, there's ordinances there, and the ordinance quite clearly says that these signs are not allowed to be out there, although you think they can be there, but based on a sign ordinance, it should be enforced, and the township should do something about it. Mr. Ryan's been very lenient about that. The letter he wrote said, hey, just move it here, move it there, but they sit there, and it becomes a problem, a sticky situation for the board, as well as Mr. Ryan enforcing it. So these are the problems. It's not easy to sit out there and come up with these comments, but we have to sit here and try to sort through the situation, what's right and what's wrong, and we try to come up with the best decision on behalf of the resident of the township, but we also have to look at, from a legal perspective, where we get into a quagmire. So thanks for your comments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy. John, I think you had a comment in the back there? Yep.
My name is John Hobson. I live at 2851 Deptford Road in Worcester. I'm not usually very vocal at these meetings, but I also worked at the Variety Club yesterday regarding the referendum for the open space project. In relation to the question you asked, Steve, regarding the Palmer property, very few people asked about the Palmer property. I brought it up very little, if at all. As soon as you mentioned open space to somebody going in or coming out of the polls, they stopped and they were interested in the open space question. All I want to say is, in support of what Bob said, there wasn't a political agenda regarding my comments to these people exiting and going into the polls about the Palmer project. My concern was about open space in the township. And when I tell you that there was one of me, and if there were 100 people that voted between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock, if I could have talked to all 100 of those people, I would have probably gotten 90 signatures on that referendum support. So it didn't have anything to do with the Palmer property. It had the open space, and that's what people seem to have on their mind. Everybody knows about the Palmer property. Everybody knows about Center Square. And I just feel respectfully to you guys on the board that if you're not aware of the feeling and the depth of the feeling in this community about what should be done with open space, then I think you're tone deaf as to what people are thinking. And I just want to support what I saw yesterday, and I'm giving you guys feedback as to what I think the community feels very passionately about. I feel passionately about it. I wouldn't usually come up here and say a thing. But listening to your question, Steve, about the Palmer project, I don't think it had anything to do with the Palmer project, although it's on everybody's mind, right here, on the front of their lobe. But I do think that it's open space in this township is something that everybody wants, and they want you to support it.
Thank you, John. Appreciate your comments.
John, we've been sitting here for, you don't come very often, but we sit here for the past couple of years going over this, so we're certainly well aware of what the people say. Maybe you misconstrued what I was trying to get across regarding the Palmer property, the legal implications. I didn't say nothing to do with the political implications, the legal implications from if these views were voiced to the lawyer about the purpose of the Open Space Fund. We have to look at a multitude of implications when we vote on something. That was my point.
Right. And I'm sure that you all have a difficult job, and I respect that. But I just wanted to tell you that what I felt yesterday and what I saw yesterday was a very passionate feeling about open space in this township. And I understand there may be, I've been to a lot of the zoning meetings, not necessarily at the Board of Supervisor meetings, and I've heard what's been going on at the zoning meetings. And I pass that on as information for you all to say that if I could have talked to 100 people, I could have gotten 90 signatures.
Okay.
Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, John. Is there anybody else who has, Kim?
Kim David, 1704 Burks Road. And, I'm really going to just support what John and Bob said. I worked at the Schwenkfelder Church probably for 5 hours, collected at least 150 signatures. Everybody I talked to was very supportive of the open space referendum concept, and at least being able to look at what might go on the ballot in November and make a choice as to whether they want to approve it or not. I think it would work well in conjunction with the current open space funding initiative the township has set forward. We, put all that money together and, it's going to do even more. And just seeing the support for open space, I think, we can just move along and look at the Zacharias lots again and preserve those. Those 3 open space lots that are along, we should, permanently preserve those. We know the township, the residents of the township want that to happen, and it'd be another step forward.
Thank you, Kim.
I have all kinds of, Kim, question for you. You sent the email to the Board of Supervisors regarding Whip Payne, their amendment coming up. Did you go over the budget for Whippane Township at all? Did you look at the?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Their budget's about $19 million. None of the money in this initiative, and Mr. Ryan can do a little further follow-up with that. Most of the money, they're not acquiring open space. It's really for just trails and painting buildings and maintenance. They're not looking to buy land or acquiring any acquisitions of property within the township. And I think that's the same with a lot of other municipalities that have passed this referendum. So once again, I'm just saying that I went and looked through the budget, saw all the money's being spent, where it's being dedicated. There's so much for Hydra Field, so much for Bustard Field, so much for Hayes Field, and painting of the buildings and things like that. That's where the money is going to go to, I guess. That's from my reading the budget. Mr. Ryan, would you?
I can touch on that, Steve. I actually watched the video when they did the presentation in Whippane ultimately. So they made an acquisition last year or a couple of years ago, Mermaid Lake. They spent about $7 million on that acquisition. So their referendum, they had a meeting in January. It's recorded, it's online, and ultimately their choice to put in a referendum question on yesterday's ballot was tied to the fact that they needed debt funding. They would have had to eliminate programs in Whippane they didn't have money for. The budget, as Steve was saying, they did a 5-year projection, and they didn't have money for programs that were already on the books, and they said, well, we can either cut the programs or we can raise the tax in order to pay for the debt service that's tied to the open space acquisitions that we've done. And that was, I think, their January meeting ultimately. So what Steve was saying is that they passed it, or I think it passed. I don't know if it's an official number based on results being out.
I believe it passed.
But ultimately, again, it's just that, sometimes so they did it, but they were doing it to pay debt, not to buy more open space. Ultimately, in this
Right, but it
particular,
was paying for the Mermaid.
that was right. So it was an acquisition they had made historically in terms of that. But it's,
But,
again,
I mean, I'm happy if it goes to trail development, not necessarily just outright buying open space, but easements or trail development or playing fields,
right, there are some very specific uses in terms of that. And it is an agenda item tonight. We are going to talk
Right,
about
I
it. I mean,
saw it
it's,
on the agenda,
it's
so-
not,
And I guess I'll be a lengthy meeting, but I guess I tie back to my friend John's comment back there about the golf course and the Palmer property. It's on everyone's mind, but other townships aren't doing that. There's a referendum that you're passing that under the guise of it's going to buy and preserve open space. It's not. It's really servicing the debt the township has. Worcester has been managed very well over the years, and we don't have the debt service that other townships have. So we're in a pretty good, solid financial situation. Most of the neighboring townships that have police forces, if you look at the budget in Whippane Township, I think the budget's $18 million, $9.5 million goes to public safety, which is probably the police force or related items to that. So people come to the supervisors, we need more service, we need this or that. It all comes with a price. And I think the neighboring townships are stuck with that, and they found the way to make it look good to the people, preserving open space, but they're not really doing that. There's no land over there that I know of they're looking to preserve. Once again, it's just servicing the debt the township has built from other funds, and that's why I made the comment last meeting about the soda tax in Philadelphia. They passed the soda tax in Philadelphia to help the preschool kids. The money did not go to the preschool kids, or maybe a very, very small percent. It went to pay the pensions and the union dues for the city of Philadelphia and the people related in the city of Philadelphia. And that's why I want to be very careful about that, how we do this, that it's done in the right way, and the money goes to the right cause.
Okay, well, I guess that'll be spelled out in the referendum.
Right.
Right, okay. No, and just one final point is, I was very clear with anybody who asked if what our work at the polls was related to the Palmer track, and I always told them it's two separate issues. I don't think at the Schwenkfelder, there was, maybe 3 people asked me that, and, it was always very clear that they were separate issues and unrelated.
Very good, thank you.
thank you, Kim. So Bob, if you've already spoken, you don't get to speak again. No.
Can I speak at the end then?
Yes, you can speak at the public comment at the end of the meeting, absolutely.
I just want to clarify a comment.
Does anybody else have any public comment at this juncture? Rob? And Jim, I'll get back to you as well.
Good evening, Rob Hayes, Worcester.
Rob, can you do me a
Can you
favor?
hear me okay,
Pull-
Steve? Anyway, I wanted to go over a perception that I heard when you were talking about those red signs, Steve. Did I hear you right? You were saying that the signs are not supposed to be out there?
So it's a temporary sign, Rob, so 30
They're temporary
days.
signs, right,
But you're only supposed to have them on for 30 days, and then they're supposed to come down.
that's right.
That was the letter that was sent out a few months ago advising of that.
That's correct. And you're supposed to have the start date when they go up and take them down 30 days and 15 feet from the roadway. But the way you just put it a few minutes ago is that it was a big problem because they're still up and they're not supposed to be there. That's what I think I heard from you.
Some of the signs have been in the same position. I'm looking from sitting here in the supervisor's position, looking at the big legal picture out there that we're getting involved in. And as Jeremy mentioned about the signs, about equally enforcing the law on all sides, I said that becomes an issue that the township has been very lenient with the red signs. They're not really saying, hey, they've been in the same position for a period of time. I don't go around and look at the signs, but there's legal opposition
Right,
looking at things like that, and I'm sure they're taking pictures of it. Hey, and it can come back to it can come back to the township issue at some point. That's why I'm
Right.
throwing it out that maybe should move the signs a little bit.
But just to make it clear, and as Rick was saying, that the way I understand what the letter said was, you can put them up for 30 days, you take them down, you can move them to another property, start it all over again, or you can put them in your garage and bring them out after 30 days and put them up again for another 30 days. Just wanted to be clear on that.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yes.
But I think some of the signs have been, that
of
hasn't
them-
been happening, and
I don't know. Okay.
thank you.
Okay, so Jim, and then if anybody else.
Jim Malik, Worcester. I'm going to give you a little different perspective. I actually did the vote count. Steve, you asked about the vote count. I get over 4,000 votes for this election. Over 4,000. That's a little bit different than I think was referenced. You hit the nail on the head because you were talking about bias. That's what you were referencing, is bias. If I went to the poll and I was in charge of the petition, I guarantee there'd be a different outcome because I have a different perspective. So somebody who's got a vested interest in seeing it get done are going to ask leading questions which lead to certain results. We learned this in medicine at a very early part of the career. So you can't say, well, we got 800 signatures, that means we're good. No, nobody got the other opinion, the other side. So you got to have the other side in order for it to be valid.
I think they addressed that with saying, hey, if I had the chance, I could have gotten more sick. There's only one person at each door, so.
Well, Steve, I'll do a petition, and I'll just tell you to trust me. Will you do that? No. You need to verify. Regarding the sign situation, I had 35 of our signs stolen, okay? That's not like some minor infraction. That's a misdemeanor. It's a criminal offense in Worcester. Somebody needs to look into who's stealing all these political signs. Now, my personal opinion, somebody must have an interest in seeing those signs go, and that's basically what I'm going to say. We established a voluntary open space fund. How much is in that open space fund?
This is the Worcester
Yeah.
Township Open Space Preservation Fund that we
Correct.
recently launched,
Voluntary, yes.
approximately $6,000.
Do you have a list of who contributed to that?
Yes,
Okay, can we get that list?
sure.
Find out? I'd be interested to see if all the folks here advocating open space have contributed. I doubt it. What I gave you guys was sent to the Worcester Republican Committee by Winnie Hayes, okay? And that's the first document that's stapled together. It's absolute garbage, and it's despicable, okay? I would urge you to read it. It's my belief that Ms. Hayes is involved in the push for a referendum to be put on the ballot. In fact, a motion regarding that referendum is on the agenda tonight. I have a serious concern regarding the influence of those documents I gave you that are stapled on the potential decision and vote regarding putting the referendum on the ballot. It's my opinion that the documents I provided to you may have a negative effect upon a fair and impartial vote on the issue. I suggest that a complete and thorough investigation be conducted to assure that none of our supervisors are being coerced in any decision that they're making. The vote that you may do, I think, should be tabled on the referendum and the open space. The vote should also be tabled until a thorough investigation is conducted into the prior purchases of open space in this township, as I've said to you over and over again, in light of the fact of Supervisor Coughlin's ethics violation, and the order number is 1784. I handed you that document as well. We had a sitting supervisor who was an attorney representing a client who was before her up front regarding open space. You cannot go forward with a referendum until you fully investigate what's been going on here in open space. You also need to provide some kind of an inventory. You can't create a fund without knowing what you have out there to possibly purchase. We haven't seen an inventory yet. So all these things have to be done before we move forward. That's why you need to table it. The question is, what's the rush? Inflation's at all-time high. It's 8%. Gas is almost $5 a gallon. The economy is heading towards recession. The stock market's tanking. And now you want to raise taxes on Worcester residents and senior citizens to buy open space, which may or may not be viable since you've provided no inventory? You guys are crazy. It's unconscionable to raise taxes right now. The idea was to put this on the presidential race in 2 years, and by then, hopefully, most of these problems will be taken care of. So for you guys to move forward, it's just simply reckless and a breach of your fiduciary duty to the taxpayers. I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Jim. We appreciate your comments. Is there anybody else who has public comment for the board tonight before we start the meeting? Okay. Seeing none, we're going to move forward. Obviously, it's an agenda item a little bit later in the meeting, and we'll circle back to the topic. But at this juncture, we get into the official action items for our meeting tonight. First item is the consent agenda. First and foremost, does any board member wish to remove any items from the consent agenda tonight? Okay, then I will entertain a motion if somebody would like to make one.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda for the treasurer's report, bill payment, and the March 16 work session and business meeting minutes.
And just for the record, we will be paying the bills in the amount of $578,748.38.
Mr. Chairman, I'll second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Next up, we have a public hearing. Bob, I'm going to hand this over to you so that you can handle the mechanics of getting us started with that.
And I'm, in a very adept manner, going to hand it right over to Joe Nolan.
Exceptional.
This is the matter regarding the Skippack Creek Watershed Multi-Municipal Pollution Reduction Plan. This is technically a public hearing, but it's for public comment on the matter, which was before the board last month, I believe. So I'll let Joe has a little bit of a presentation, and then there would be an opportunity for any public comment on the watershed plan.
Thank you. As Bob said, the purpose of this presentation and the public hearing tonight is to inform the residents of the township once again of the completion at this point of the Skippack Creek Multi-Municipal Pollution Reduction Plan. You've heard me talk probably half dozen times about this over the past 4 or 5 years. This involves the township's MS4 program. For those of you not familiar with the term MS4, it means Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. Next one. A copy of the final draft pollution reduction plan is at the township building, and it's currently in the public comment period, which is active until May 31st. Anyone that wishes to look at the actual document is welcome to go to the township and ask to look at the document further. It's about 100 pages. There's a lot of technical issues, technical portions to it, as well as computerized printouts, which is a result of the study. The MS4 program is a federally mandated program administered by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. It requires municipalities to educate the public regarding pollutants from stormwater, to monitor discharges from all the storm sewer systems in the township, and to reduce pollutants to impaired streams. The pollution reduction plan at the moment, requires the township to reduce pollutants by 10% over the first 5-year period of the permit. It also calls for a 5% reduction in total phosphorus load to the stream. So you have to reduce sediment to the stream by 10% and phosphorus loading to the stream by 5%. Back in 2017, when this first came about, 6 municipalities within the Skippack Creek watershed got together and said it's better, more productive, more efficient if we look at the watershed on a watershed basis as opposed to looking at municipal boundaries. There was a model prepared on the Skippack watershed which provided loadings that were adopted by DEP and EPA, which then were applied to the township, which indicated Worcester Township's individual loading. Basically, the model showed that certain things would reduce the sediment by 46% of the load to the stream at that time. In 2018, the municipalities, 6 municipalities decided to go together and look at this jointly. 2020, Lower Salford, which is one of the 6, dropped out and indicated that they wanted to proceed on their own. And that left Hatfield Township, Lower Providence Township, Skippack Township, Towmenson Township, and Worcester Township as part of what's called the Skippack Alliance. The 5 municipalities I just mentioned had numerous meetings, and we got together and came up with a preliminary agreement on cost sharing in November of '21. That agreement was the agreement that this board passed at last month's meeting that Bob referenced. You see on the screen a plan, a map of the Skippack watershed, which is in green, and you can see the municipal boundaries in black which shows the portion of the watershed in each individual municipality. Talminson, for instance, 100% of the township is in Skipback watershed. Worcester, most of it is in the Skipback watershed. We also have land in the Stony Creek watershed and the Wissahickon watershed. The multi-municipal pollution reduction plan, which has been prepared, as I said, includes the 5 townships, and the plan proposes 13 best management practices, which we call projects, within the watershed to reduce pollutants throughout the 5 municipalities. The plan also included 4 additional alternates if it was necessary. There are 4 primary projects in Worcester Township. The Clyston Road Basin retrofit, which has already been completed, was one of them. Riparian buffer plantings along the Zacharias Creek. Portion of that is already completed, and the township received a grant for that work, as well as the Clyston Road Basin retrofit. And the additional 2 projects call for stream restoration along the Zacharias Creek, approximately 3,500 linear feet of stream restoration. The agreement between the municipalities provides for the management, cost distribution, and pollutant reduction distribution of the participating municipalities. The sediment from Worcester Township is 22.8% of the total sediment load to Skipback Creek from all 5 municipalities. The cost distribution was determined using a complex formula that we all agreed to, and based on that formula, Worcester Township will be responsible for 16.25% of the total cost. In numbers, that's a little over $1 million. The reason that all 5 municipalities decided to combine their efforts was, number 1, efficiencies, management efficiencies, project efficiencies, but the biggest potential benefit was the availability of grant funding to do this work. DEP and the state who administers the grant program indicated that projects and municipalities and alliances that form together would get preferential treatment in trying to obtain some of the grant funding. So they think it as a positive for 5 municipalities to tackle this problem on a watershed basis as opposed to just municipal boundaries. Next steps, the advertisement of this plan has already been placed, and that advertisement allows each municipality to obtain written comments on the plan until May 31st. As I said, that copy of this plan is at the Township Building. If anybody wishes to review it, you may, and you may also provide comments in writing to the township, which will be considered and incorporated into the plan. The other requirement is a public hearing notifying the residents of the pollution reduction plan, which is exactly what we're doing at the moment. After the public comment period, all municipalities will finally approve the plan, and this will all be submitted to DEP for their review and final approval. DEP has already reviewed the draft document and has indicated that they are in a position to approve it once we go through all of the procedures that we're doing now. When that's done, DEP will then issue the 5-year permit, which will start the 5-year period in which time frame we have to complete the projects that I mentioned. And each township where the projects will be located will be responsible for the design and the bidding of those actual projects. That's a quick summary. Any questions? I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Let me do it this way. Is there any public comment? Because this is a public comment hearing. So is there any public comment? Having no public comment tonight, again, folks are reminded, as Joe just indicated, you can review the document in more detail at the Township Building at your convenience, and you can submit written comments if you'd like. Again, this satisfies the obligation of the of the stormwater management program. And I defer to the board. You don't have to act, there's no action required by the board.
Okay.
We acted on it before.
Right, we approved the agreement last month. That's what you're referencing, correct?
And this is the required public comment. Let the record reflect that there's no public comment, and unless you have anything further, we could close the record and move to the next step.
I have a question, Mr. Nolan. You mentioned Lower Salford dropped out of the group. Do they have to come up with their own program?
Yes. They're acting independently.
There's a cost benefit for Worcester Township to share the cost with the other municipalities. It lowers the cost by being in a group.
Significantly.
And we can share the information.
That information has been shared on the presentations that I've previously done here, but it's also available, and I can provide that to Mr. Ryan again if need be.
So by Lower Salford dropping out, our costs go up slightly. Now, instead of being 1/6, 1/7 is 1/6, or is it prorated somehow?
Not necessarily. Lower Salford dropped out because they had a lot of open space in the township that they felt they could use more efficiently and cost effectively. What we had to do was to relocate some of those projects in Lower Salford into the 5 remaining municipalities. So the cost per municipality is pretty similar with 6 versus 5.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's reflect that the public comment's over and court reporter can go home.
Thank you, Bob. So the next item on our agenda is a bid award, and this is going to be a motion to award a bid for the 2022 road program. Is this with you, Joe, as well?
Thank you. We opened bids on May 11th, 2022 for the 2022 Worcester Roadway Improvement Program. This is an annual program that the township prepares to repair, repave roads, and in some cases provide drainage improvements as well. This year there were a lot of roads included in the contract, and there were a base bid prepared and as well as 3 alternate bid items if the township so decided to award those. The base bid contract was submitted by Glasgow Inc. of Glenside, Pennsylvania, and their base bid was $929,803.90. There were also 3 alternate bids, and if those bids were awarded, the total cost of the contract would be $1,120,560.80. We've reviewed the bid documents submitted by Glasgow. All are in order. Glasgow has worked in the township on the road programs several times in the past, and they're qualified to perform this work. That's basically their line of business. So we provided a letter to the township dated May 12th, which included a summary of what I just discussed, as well as a summary of the bids and a bid tabulation of each bid submitted, which provides the detailed information on the unit prices and things like that. I'd be happy to answer any questions on the results of the bid.
Sure, I'd be curious to the cost structure. I know, Tommy, you had sent some information relative to the budget for the road program relative to where these bids came in, and I'm just curious to sort of where that fell from your...
Well, it's no secret with the price of oil and the price of gas that paving costs are higher this year than they were last year. So we are seeing higher results in all of our road programs. It's the nature of the business. PennDOT monitors the pricing of asphalt and components that are used in the processing and manufacturing of paving, and they actually have an index which they assign the day that bid is awarded, and then obviously if prices significantly increase beyond that index, then prices would need to be adjusted, and that's a nature of this type of project. So, you know, you can't compare this year's bid to last year's as far as the unit prices go. So we went through a high period, and then we went through a low period when gas was $2.40 a gallon. Now we're up to obviously significant increase in pricing.
Okay. And then we have 3 alternate, Steve, you have it?
Yeah, Joe, we discussed this before, but a follow-up question to it. A number of years ago, 8, 10, 12 years ago, the price of fuel and asphalt went up quite a bit, and we had a local contractor that came to the township, hey, we really have a problem here. There is a step ladder built in that figure. What happens if it I mean, you talk to home builders, a lot of home builders are getting out of the business because they can't project what the price of lumber is going to be, what the price of drywall is going to be, what the price of refrigerator and dryer is going to be. So they're not fooling around with it. They're just saying, they're walking away from it. Rather than giving a bid of $1 million to build a house, and it comes in at 1.75 or something, they can't do that. How's Worcester to protect it from the asphalt people, them coming back and saying, you know what, we just can't do that?
Well, that's the purpose of the index. PennDOT is the one that monitors and establishes the index. Index is determined on the day that they submit their bid. Say the index is 1,000. And then when they actually buy the material at the plant, if the index is 1,100, then there's a 10% price adjustment for the asphalt. That's how it works. And it's automatically built into the bid structure. And that's what guides it. They can't come back and say, you know, anything else than that. That's the only thing that guides it. And it has to be over a percentage. I think it has to be over 10%.
It comes back at 30%. We then have to negotiate with those folks?
We don't negotiate. We don't negotiate. We're obligated to pay what the index
number is.
says it is.
Okay.
Yeah,
Everything's
it's an
predicated
escalator.
on the index number.
It's an index escalator. It's like what municipalities that jointly bid their fuel costs. It's the same thing. All the gasoline they bid, it fluctuates. It's whatever it is at the time it's delivered. That's what you pay.
You get into trouble if you don't have an escalator or an index built in bid structure. That's where you get into trouble.
That's a generally accepted way of doing how it's done by the PennDOT index then. That's how everyone's protected.
For road programs, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And you have to remember as well that this project is part of our liquid fuels program, and we do get funds from PennDOT to contribute towards this. So it's all of this has to be approved by PennDOT, it is regulated by PennDOT, and then partially funded by PennDOT.
Okay, so the question, so there's twofold. The first is approving the base bid, and then there's 3 alternative bids in terms of whether we want to approve those as well. In terms of, Joe, historically you and the township have typically said, do the alternates as well if you have the money. You know, like there's typically, and in this case, I think it's an additional couple $100,000 to accommodate 3 additional items. From a board standpoint, does anybody have any specific thoughts on the alternates? And I think obviously the base bid is higher than envisioned, but not out of line to sort of maintaining the road program, and it'd be more a question of what our thoughts are on the alternate bids and whether or not we think we should do those as well.
Yeah, I think we just rely on, I mean, Joe does this, once again, knows how the system's set up and all the information set along with that. So I think I personally follow his guide and his suggestion on this. I don't know enough about the asphalt and blacktop business.
Right. I mean, I would agree. I think we certainly want to do more if we can do more. And one of the little benefits this year is we have funding that we're getting. I'll call it the COVID money because I forget what we call it, but ultimately there's funding we can use for this, Tommy, correct, that we're getting?
Funding from the American Rescue Plan Act.
The American Rescue Plan. So as some folks might remember, we got some money last June. We're getting some additional money this June, and those funds can be used for items like the alternate bids on the road program so that we can sort of absorb that cost through those funds if we so choose. So you need a motion from us, Joe, at this point?
Yes, to
Okay.
award the contract and the alternates if so desired.
Okay, you want to make a motion on that?
Make a motion for the bid award for the 2022 road program. Do you need to put any other criteria?
For the base bid as well as the 3 alternate bids. Is that adequate? Okay. And we.
And I'll second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Maeve? Sure. You don't need to sign in again, but you do need to talk into our microphone.
Exciting.
That's all right.
Maeve Vogan, Dell Road, Worcester. So how much, Joe, so last year, how many miles did we do for road, and compared to this year on the mileage of the roads that we're repairing and redoing, how much is the increase? So per mile.
Well, I can't give you miles.
I know.
I can give you the roads that we're doing this year.
I saw the roads.
Oh, okay.
Which roads we were doing.
Yeah. This is a more aggressive contract than last year. In addition to roads, we're actually doing the trails at 3 parks as well. Hebner Park, we're repaving those. Mount Kirk Park and part of the Hollow Road trail at Zacharias Creek, we're repaving those trails as part of this road program as well. So it is more square yards this year as well. And I always look at it, it's better to do as much work as you can rather than kick the can down the road, because we've made great progress in this township over the past numerous years with the more aggressive road program.
Yep.
I can't tell you how many other townships, there's no township that I'm familiar with that puts as much into their roads as Worcester Township. Some townships only spend as much as they get on liquid fuels. Most townships do. That's all they spend. So I think that the township is ahead of the curve. You know, we have a lot of drainage issues in the older roads, and what this does is it maintains the roads, keeps them in good condition, and we're getting to the point now where we're starting to need to resurface some of the developments when I came here that were new. Milestone, you know, they were brand new developments. That was many, many years ago. So it's a never-ending thing. If you don't do it now, you're just going to have to add whatever you don't do to next year. That gets bigger, and you just keep accumulating more roads and more roads. So my recommendation, if you have the funds, is to get ahead of the curve and do as much as you can in a specific year. Next year, the cost could be even higher.
Oh, it will be higher.
Yeah, so I hope that answers your question.
Sort of.
And I can give you specifics, I just don't have them with me tonight. I can give
That's
those.
okay. I'm going to go back and look at what it was last year and compare it myself. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maeve. Are there any additional public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Rick, just to follow up to Joe's comment.
Thank you.
I traveled through Lansdale today, and the roads, every road that went on, it was atrocious. And when I finally got to Hatfield Township, I said, what a difference. And I think this goes back to the township managing their funds correctly. You've been around a long time knowing how the township does things. We pick and choose. We have a list. The roadmaster goes out with the township manager, and they have a list of the good roads, the bad roads, and the ugly roads. And we take care of it that way. But when you spend too much money, our old manager for a while was Lee Magnum, old township manager of Lansdale. And when they start the renovations in Lansdale, that central building there, it broke the township. Now the residents are paying the price for that really beautiful building there that the township officials have. And the residents are now subject to those terrible roads, as well as the neighbors going through there. It's just, so my hat's off to you and the roadmaster going through the road program. As you said, there's not many really bad roads in Worcester, and it's a job well done, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Steve. So next item on our agenda is going to be a motion to approve a planning module for 2083 Bustard Road for submission to the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. Joe, this you again?
Yes,
You
it
getting
is.
jealous there, Bob? I mean,
I'm happy to sit here like this.
somehow I sense you're going to play a role in tonight, but we'll see.
I did review the planning module for the township and submitted a letter dated March 24th, 2022. It's a component one sewage facilities planning module, which is for on-site on-site sewage disposal system. The health department, county health department also submitted a letter to the township March 7th, saying they have no objections to the module. And also, the Township Planning Commission approved it as well. So this requires a motion, and then the township can submit this to DEP.
Right, a DEP still needs to approve this, correct?
Yes,
This is just,
yes.
we've gone through all our local requirements, and now we send it over to them, and they either say yay, no, or something in between.
Yes, and this, for an on-lot system, as long as you have the proper testing, the health department's okay with it. These are the regulatory process we need to go through. But DEP will probably approve the module, and then they'll be able to proceed.
Okay. Does any other board member have any specific questions on this item? Okay, then if somebody wants to make a motion,
Make a motion to approve the planning module for the 2083 Bustard Road for the DEP.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Joe. So next item on our agenda is a motion regarding a referendum question regarding open space funding. So if it's all right with you two, I'd like to start. I know we've had, and maybe I'll just frame a little backdrop, and then we'll have some discussion as we need to. So the topic has come up a few times. It first came up a couple of years ago. We had some meetings on the conversation of putting a ballot question in front of the residents to give them an opportunity to vote for ultimately a dedicated fund for open space. And as some of the public comment from earlier, as well as public comment we've had in past meetings, there's an opportunity, there's an opportunity to put it in front of the voters a variety of different ways, which we've talked about in past meetings. You can do it through, invariably it's some form of tax. We talked about an earned income tax component. We've talked about a property tax option in past meetings. We also talked about a debt option that Upper Dublin put a question on their ballot on 2 separate occasions and said, we would like your permission to spend X million. In their case, it was 30 to get approval. And then as they saw opportunities for open space, then they could acquire those up to that debt amount that had been approved. There's pros and cons always. When we talked about it in early 2020, we were generally in agreement that it made sense to put something in front of the voters, and then COVID hit and we tabled it. And last year the topic came up, and certainly I've always felt strongly that putting it in front of the voters at a time when, in theory, the most number of people would be voting, if you get a majority at that time, then you can conclude to some degree that the people want it. That you're giving them an opportunity to make that decision, and you're doing it at a time when a lot will vote. You can always make an argument to push it to 2024 and say it should only be a presidential election. One of the things that sort of, when I started looking at it, is saying, okay, well, why now, why not now? And I went through a process of sort of trying to figure out, is there an argument that supersedes everything, that you can sort of layer on top? And I think that there's never a perfect time if you're putting a tax in front of people, and you can sugarcoat it a variety of ways. You can package it to the residents really in any way. You can call it a revenue share, you can call it an open space. Bert, you were talking last month and sort of how we would define it, define it as a very specific line item on a budget, so folks could know very specifically what the case was there. Where I eventually arrived, and I'll get there, give me a minute, was, there were arguments about it wouldn't be a lot of money per resident, that it gives residents, when we've had surveys in the past, they've told us that open space matters. And a lot of that, we don't disagree with that, and I think some of the things that we've done as a board, once we started to come out of COVID, there's been a couple of things. We codified it in open space program. So, Jim talked about some concerns about past open space purchases that predates all of us, ultimately, goes back in some cases 20 years. And they're fair and valid arguments to make. Are we spending money wisely? Have we done our due diligence on spending? But ultimately, we can always sort of have that cloud sitting over us and saying, well, you've got, if somebody did something in the past, have we properly gone back and looked at preventing it? Well, part of what we're doing to prevent that is we codified an open space program very specifically. We took that and we are putting the administration of that to our staff. Stacy spent a lot of time with that. Tommy spent a lot of time with that. Bob was involved with that and making sure that what we put in place protects us a little bit to make sure. Jim, you asked about an inventory. We've done that. Now, I've talked about this in some past meetings. The audience doesn't participate in land acquisition. The board does. It's an executive session matter. It's a very private matter for a lot of residents who might have an interest in wanting to do a transaction with us. Steve, I think, said in a meeting, somebody said, well, what might you buy or not buy? And I think Steve's comment was, nothing's off the table. Like, we're not starting and saying there's only these 3 parcels and we only care about these 3 parcels. I mean, invariably, you don't know what's going to come before you. So the idea then just becomes, should you have a dedicated source of funding to do that, ultimately? If historically, we've bought open space. We've done it through farmland preservation. We've done it through grant programs. We've done it just through straight acquisition. So the township's always been supportive of that. This board has always been supportive of that. Part of putting a program in place was so that as questions get raised, we can defer to the program and say, hey, yeah, we're following that. We're trying very hard to make sure that there aren't conflicts of interest regarding any particular acquisition that might take place. We're not, but there's a delicate line. You can allow the voters to participate if they vote for or against, but ultimately, even if you don't do a referendum, this board has authority to acquire real estate if it's in the best interest of the township. I mean, that's part of the reason we have representative government, and it's part of the reason that you've chosen to elect, some of you have chosen to elect all 3 of us over the course of the last several years. So, it's, at the end of the day, I support it. I've said it in this meeting many times. I know Steve has said it. I know Lou has said it. I support it. It's just about trying to figure out, is this an appropriate time to do that? And if it is, how do we go about it? Part of, Jim said, what's the rush? Well, part of it is the mechanics of giving our solicitor, enough direction that he can get the pieces in place that you can meet the deadlines that are going to be there. We talked about a July deadline. It was either last month or the month before. And we talked about an August deadline in order to just make sure you've got the language correct. And what we need to do, I think, is try to come to some consensus to say, do we think it makes sense to go forward? And if we do, what might be the mechanism so at least Bob can get to a point where he's drafting something to put before us? So in terms of what you might need from us, Bob, I think ultimately would be, say, first, do we have some consensus on doing it? And then if we have some consensus, what might be, I've said repeatedly in the meetings, I support a property tax. That's the mechanism I think is a way to distribute the cost across the most residents. We have roughly $1 billion in property value. You make the math easy. I think it's $998 million if somebody actually wants to go look it up, but you say you have $1 billion. So you would tax it as a millage. I've read up a lot on millages. I still don't understand them. But what I do know is a half a millage translates to basically $500,000 on $1 billion. So math gets a little bit easier there. You say, okay, well, if we think we need $500,000 a year, then it would be $500,000. If we think it's $1 million, then it's $1 million. If we think it's $1.5 million, it's 1.5. You do the math, and then you say, all right, well, what does that mean to a resident if we think it's going to be a property tax? Okay, well, if it's $100,000 in appraised value, and every one of us, every August, either through escrow or a check, we all pay property tax. Ultimately, you say, well, what does that mean to a resident? $50 per 100,000 appraised, roughly. So you take a look. I did a lot of research to try to figure, well, what does that mean to the average resident? Appraised value of $300,000 to $500,000 is a range for a lot of residents. It's $150 to $250 a year. So some of the people have made comments about it not being a significant number to an individual. You can make an argument that says, okay, well, what about the seniors? There's always the whatabouts in terms of that. I realize I'm one vote. I'm only one vote of three. It's always great if we're in full consensus. I think there's never a perfect time. We can talk ourselves out of it if we want. But ultimately, there's a spot where I've kind of looked at it and said, you know what? If you want to put it in front of the residents and let them make that determination, they tell us yes or no on that particular item. It doesn't prevent us from acquisition with or without it. We've shown in the past that we can do that, but it is a way, it's a way that we can put it forward so that they can make that decision. Ultimately say, yeah, we support it. It is easier to have a dedicated fund just in terms of planning. So when we talked about setting up the open space program, we put a bold initiative. If you don't put a goal on paper, they say you don't achieve the goal. And what we talked about was 300 acres by 2023 to coincide with the 300-year anniversary of Worcester. That was sort of the brainchild around the open space program that we enacted, and a lot of you should have gotten stuff in the mail as well as the newsletter on that over the course of the last few months. Well, you don't get there if we need money to do that. Having a dedicated source gives us an opportunity, or the residents say no. You put a referendum. Bob talked a little bit last month about very clear language, that ultimately if we decide and can agree, then the language has to be extremely clear. This is what it is. This is exactly what it is. We don't want, I know Steve's point earlier, and I think it got misconstrued a little bit, is that we don't want people thinking that the money's for something that it's not. You want to make sure they understand fully what you can and can't do here. What you have money you can spend to maintain properties, but you also want to do land acquisition. So I'm rambling a little bit. I apologize. It's certainly, I've spent a lot of time thinking through whether, and I've sort of went through my threshold. One is, do I generally support it? Yes. How do I think it should be funded if ultimately we're going to put it in front of voters? I think it should be a property tax. When in looking at, there's an argument for earned income, but invariably there's a lot of residents that don't pay an earned income. And one of my personal, philosophically, I feel like if open space benefits everybody, then everybody should pay for open space. If you're behind it, and I applaud that you collected 1,000 signatures at the end of the day. You did have 80-degree weather yesterday. You didn't have rain or snow, so it was nice weather, but it's still, that's an onerous task to sit at a poll for an entire day and collect signatures. But it's just one piece of the puzzle ultimately in terms of making that decision. That doesn't say, oh, you got the signatures, we should automatically do that. No, it's just another piece of data that we kind of look at in terms of that. So generally speaking, I'm supportive. I think a property tax can work, but I certainly want your input. I want your input in terms of what you think, whether you think it doesn't make sense and why, just so we can sort of at least get to some, hey, Bob, do this next or not.
Let me try to put it in context. So you very clearly outlined the potential options. What I'm hearing you say, specifically, and you haven't voted yet, is that you're in favor of the tax option.
Correct.
And that would be your suggestion. And now you need to hear from Lou.
Yep.
And you need to hear from Steve about whether they agree with that or not agree with that. And then ultimately what you're going to do what you could do tonight is if there's a majority that has, I'm going to use the term consensus right now, if there's a majority of you that have a consensus in favor of one or another option, you would be authorizing me to prepare a resolution to put the referendum on the ballot. That's what you'd be doing.
So we would be giving you direction, then ultimately there'd be another step. We would have to vote on a resolution.
Prepare and adopt a resolution. And I want to make sure the manager and I are on the same page on this.
Yes, a few bits of information. You need the type of referendum, the debt or the tax, and if you go with the tax, it would be the type of tax, real estate or earned income, and for each specific tax, the rate.
So if there's consensus, majority, with the tax option, Tommy's given you the details, and I would prepare a resolution for you to adopt that would formally place it on the ballot if it were to go that far for November.
So there would be an additional step ultimately. I guess at the end of the day, I'm saying we give you good direction, but would there still be a resolution step that we would have to take if we
Correct.
can get to that?
Yeah,
Okay,
I didn't prepare a resolution.
that's fine. No,
But, and again, I'm not going to, I want to remind you of the deadline.
yep.
And the deadline for the tax option is that the notice must be published prior to July 19. There was an August date that it has to get to the county. So we're pushing, you know, again, I don't want to tell you folks what to do, but if you're going to make a decision on this
Right.
for this November, you're running out of time. Probably do it another meeting, but my suggestion is to be safe about it. If you're going to move ahead
Yep.
with the referendum, what do they, what's that Neil Young record? Tonight's the night. Tonight's the night. So if
You're bringing me back to my youth there.
yeah, I can't tell you you have to do it tonight, but what I'm telling you is the flexibility is getting narrower.
Okay. Either way, you want to go Lou?
I'm kind of agreeing with Rick on the property tax version, and then you bounced around the property tax version.
Go ahead.
I'm agreeing with Rick on his,
On the tax option?
on the property tax versus earned income. And you went through the Upper Dublin version last meeting, so it's all about the mechanics and the percentage, I believe.
So you're suggesting that you agree with Rick,
Yes.
and then you get a third vote, a third person here that,
I think we all hear what the residents of Worcester say. I wasn't at the meeting where the term eminent domain came up, where the township we were suggested by people that we just take the Palmer land by eminent domain. We do listen to those comments. We ask legal counsel about that. Research is done about it, and we get the report back from a solicitor. So there's a lot of things, once again, you folks out there can throw these things out that it sounds great. You may not think we're working on it. We do listen to you. We hear what you say, but we have to mull it over, look at the legal implications that the township could be put into a really bad situation. Dr. Malik addressed not having a list of open space properties. And there's case law for all this stuff. Everything that the township does, I don't want to say the lawyers already know the outcome of what's going to happen, but the lawyers already know the outcome of what's going to happen. So we, the township, has to sit here and pay these legal bills. Most of the situations, I'll use the halfway house, recovery house over here in Skippack Pike. Before that ever came up, before the township, we knew it was going to happen. There's legal precedent for those items. With these land acquisitions, such as the eminent domain, there's problems come along with that. And Mr. Brandt did the research. He told us about case law and the steps you have to follow and the reasons why you can't do certain things. And that's essentially what happened. So I think Mr. Brandt gives us good guidance. He knows, even before we sit there for 2 years arguing in court, what the outcome's going to be. But the lawyers love to make money, not Mr. Brandt, but the lawyers pretty much know the outcome based on case law. So I just want you to know we all hear what you have to say. We appreciate you coming out and making the comments, but we have, I guess, the fiduciary responsibility to try to do the right thing on behalf of the residents of the township. So I just wanted to say that. I think Mr. DeLello made an eloquent statement. I think it's, I also agree with Mr. DeLello, but I think we have to see what Mr. Brandt comes up with. So I think we can talk about it, say we're all in agreement, and I think we have to have Mr. Brandt come up with a statement or how it's going to be done before we actually vote on it, would probably be next month. He can prepare, we can't vote on something that we haven't really seen yet.
But the motion would be from one of you right now to authorize
You to draft that off the author.
option.
Okay.
Details that need to be filled in by you are,
We need the type of tax and
Yep.
then the proposed rate for the tax.
and what's the type of tax that you,
Real estate or earned income.
so you,
Real estate is what I was saying.
so the motion would be to authorize a referendum question regarding open space funding for the November ballot
Yep.
based upon a real estate tax.
And you have to let us know the millage.
Okay, so I was saying
Five,
half a
right?
mil is, I was saying a half a mil.
Right, so that's the simple motion. Everybody,
Want me to repeat all that now? Make a motion for you to authorize a draft?
Mr. Brandt, question. We're authorizing this. What happens in 5 years down the road, the board says they want to up it? Is that possible, or can we lock it in? You know, it becomes a situation
Yeah.
that once the government gets involved in something, you need a little more. It's much like the government we do business with. The government comes back, they want more and more and more. I don't want to get in that situation.
let Tommy answer that.
Yeah, so if you decided later to increase it, another referendum is required. Once you establish it, it has to be in place for at least 5 years, unless you've retired all the debt that you've incurred with the open spaces that you've purchased with the money. To extinguish it at any time after that also requires a referendum. So you're locked in. You don't have the ability to increase or decrease each year as you would, let's say, the property tax under the second-class township code general millage of 14 mils. You're locked in.
Mr. Ryan, being as your microphone's on, I'll ask you another question. Is it possible, without this referendum, the township could float open space purchases with a loan setup, or, you know, how we did the sewer system through the government financing ability that the township can acquire?
Yeah, so the amount of money the township can borrow is set by state law. In specific, we can borrow up to 250% of our general fund revenue base. And when you do the math, that means that we can borrow without any voter approval, referendum approval, approximately $12.5 million in bonds. That's our limit. Sewer's different because sewer is considered self-liquidating debt, and there's no limit on that. There's also no limit to the amount of money we can borrow with a voter referendum. So if you decided to borrow without an open space tax, understand that we're capped at the amount of money we can borrow, and that's about $12.5 million.
Okay. Yeah, I thank you. I guess another comment is I had, but we've talked about for a year asking the residents, and I mentioned it last meeting, for state purposes. Now, we did put a newsletter out in the newsletter a month or two ago. We have received some nibbles from some people regarding their interest in maybe doing some estate or land deals with the township. That's why I asked Mr. Ryan the question, what can we really do without the referendum? Are we in the ability to make some of these purchases, you know, now? So it's a complicated situation that
is.
we're in, but, you know, we have the financial ability as a township because we've been prudent over the years, you know, with money. But I don't want the residents to get stuck, as somebody said about the rising fuel, all the costs are out there. And it's nice to say that, but once again, we represent all the people in the township, the younger people, the older people, and money's tight with people right now. So it's just something that the people have the ability to go to referendum and they have to decide. But I think it's imperative on the township to spell this out, that the people actually understand what they're voting on, that
Right.
and where the money's going to go to. It's definitely strictly for open space. The money's only for open space purchases. It's not to do anything with any other budgetary processes or bills the township has, which other townships have been doing. And I say that, once again, I've been on the farm board for 10 years, and we buy the open space in the county. And there's very, very few townships in the county willing to contribute open space money to the farm board. Worcester's one, Franconi's another one. But none of our neighboring townships that we beg money from are willing to give. We'd like the boards to give 10% to the farm board. If we have $1 million, we'd like to come in and, okay, why don't you come up with $100,000 for open space? And I can't think of many townships that I've approached personally, because we, the farm board, have to reach out to these people. Hey, would you like to help us to stretch our money a little bit further so we can buy more land? And I'd say 95% of the townships that want open space aren't willing to contribute to the open space from the state and county money. So I think Worcester's done a good job over the years towing their line. So
if you want me to repeat the motion,
That might be helpful.
are you ready? I'm going to do the best I can. The resolution would be to authorize the solicitor to prepare a resolution regarding open space funding to be placed on the November ballot for a real estate tax of $500,000. And if you make that motion and second it, take public comment, then I will have that back to you in more detail.
For the June meeting.
the June meeting.
We're done.
With more detail, you know, that it'll be clear. But again, I didn't presume to know which way you folks were going to go until you talked it through and heard from folks. So
I had to go through my spreadsheets, Bob. I had to.
yeah, that's the motion. Someone has to make it if they'd like to.
I'm going to make a motion for Bob to prepare the referendum for all that stuff he just said. All right? Because I'm not going through that, but that's all right.
And I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion that is currently on the floor? Okay.
Hi, I'm Susan Smith. I just want to say, yay, thank you so much. I'm thrilled. I wanted to just mention very quickly that situation with Mermaid Lake, as I understand it, is that they bought the property through a bond, and now this referendum is going to help pay down that debt. So you can go either way, you know, either direction, but they chose to do it that way, where they bought it with a bond and now ostensibly preserving that space and, you know, not filling it up with residents or commercial property. So I'm excited about the possibility of the property tax. I think that a fair point was made that it affects everybody across the way, and we're talking about space and property, so it's sort of a nice alignment in that regard as well. And yeah, I just want to see if there was anything else I wanted to say. The folks really were not just willing to sign the petition, but they were enthusiastic about the idea. And so I'm thrilled that the motion has been made and seconded. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. We appreciate your comments. Bob, and then I'll get to you, Jim, as well.
Bob Festnack, 2203 Outback Lane. Just a bit nitpicky, but just trying to clear up the thing about the number of voters. Again, I could be wrong. When I looked at the site today, there's difference between votes of 4,000 and voters of 2,100, because some of the voters voted for 2 out of 3 candidates and some of the committee person votes.
Okay.
So there's more votes than people. I went with the number of people. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Bob. Jim?
Jim Malik, Worcester. I thought the eloquent gentleman was going to come up here and make the point he made at the other meeting, that it should be not a property tax, but an earned income tax. Because I agreed with him on it should be an earned income tax. Because what you're going to end up doing is taxing senior citizens. Bad idea. Is there a minimum acreage number you're using for what you're going to purchase with this fund you're going to create by taxing the residents? We're going to buy 10-acre properties?
So Jim, we have said in this meeting there isn't a hard up or down. I mean, we're
Okay.
trying to be intelligent with
I'll
it.
make it easy for you. Will you buy a 10-acre property?
I can't answer that, Jim. It's not, I
Jim,
mean,
I'm sorry, what'd you say, by what?
10 acres. Going to buy 10 acres?
You know, we haven't set some of those guidelines up. I'll speak for the farm board. What the guideline is there, essentially. It originally started at 100 acres, and they were allowed to cut the farm in half and do 50 acres. And now it's down to approximately 25 acres. What happens is, the more land you have, the more valuable the piece of land is to the county and the municipality. So smaller pieces of land are usually passed over.
Right. So my recollection, it was 50 before, way back when, you had to buy 50. Now it's 25. My question is, you have no criteria for what you're going to buy. You know, buy 8 acres? I mean, what are you going to do? You have no criteria. You're blowing through this stuff with no criteria. How many properties meet a minimum acreage requirement in your inventory list?
so the number was north of 20 properties when we put together the inventory. And Jim, for discretion, we're not
Rick, it was a simple question.
north
I
of
didn't
20,
ask for-
Jim.
I didn't ask for names. What's the average acreage of the 20 properties?
More than 25.
So all of them, all 20 are more than 25 acres?
Is that correct, Tom? I think that was the number that I had.
Yeah, I don't think there were any under 20.
Okay,
So it's conceivable some
Right.
are only north of 20.
gotcha. How much would it cost at today's prices to buy 25 acres? Let's just say it's a good property. How much money would we need to spend to buy 20?
Jim, we've had some people approach us already about that, and we have to look at the viability of the property. Is it near a road, the scenic view, can people really see it? Once again, that's a list, Jim, that's a list, we on the farm board, there's a checklist of 9 items, the valuable of the
Okay.
property. So it can go anywhere from what we pay.
Average, just give me an average middle number.
You talk to a developer, and they'll say an acre of ground in Worcester is worth $250,000 for a building lot, for 2 acres of ground.
So roughly what, 5 million?
Well, it depends.
That's a rough
depends-
number. It's 5
Depends on the
million, right?
road frontage, where the land's at. So that's
I got it. So the reason I'm saying this, how much money will we generate per year you go in with your tax scheme here? How much money will come in? Do you guys figure that number out?
Rick said about $500,000.
Approximately $500,000, a little north of 500,000.
So if you do the math, at 500 grand a year, all these properties are 25 acres at an average of 5 million. It's going to take 10 years for you to generate enough money to buy one of them. Is that right?
No.
So what, you're going to chip in township money too?
The fund, what we talked about in the public meeting a couple of months ago and last month is ultimately you have that money, you can turn around and still do a bond acquisition on a piece of property. So if you had a piece of property that appraised at a particular number, and then you would pay the debt service out of the $500,000 a year you were collecting. So you would leverage the money potentially. Or you'd do it, or you would wait until you had enough in it for a specific purchase.
Okay, so you get 2 years into this, you get $1 million in the fund. You got a $5 million property come up. What you're saying is you can go with the bond to get the rest?
You would actually borrow the 5 million and you would pay the debt service out of the million that
Right.
you've,
So why don't you
to
just
that
use,
point.
why don't you just use the 18 million you got in the bank and dispense with added taxes? You got $18 million sitting around doing nothing, zero. You could make like at least 2 acquisitions at 5 million apiece, rather than raising taxes on township residents. Because you got to 18 million. You know how you got to 18 million, right? It just didn't occur. You overtaxed the residents of Worcester to have surpluses to generate $18 million, right? You guys have been overtaxing the residents of Worcester to the tune of $18 million. Unless the government gave you grants that contributed to it. Am I right?
Jim, I
I know I'm right.
appreciate your comments on that.
Thank you.
Jim, they're the tough questions we're faced with. You know, it is. So
I get it.
it's a balancing act. Do we want to do it? We don't want to do it. And we have the money, and someone will say, "Hey, why do you need more money? You have $18 million sitting in the bank." Well, that'll quickly go down. That's in the next segment, but that's besides the point. It's tough, and that's why I asked the question of Mr. Ryan. Can a township afford to buy properties? And the answer, he said, yeah, we can service a debt. And Rick alluded to that. Hey, if something comes up, we don't have to wait for the fund to build up to $5 million. It's only going to be $500,000 the first year, and then $1 million. Then you can do the math. But if we need to service a debt through the program Mr. Ryan talked about, the township can do that. So it will take a long time, but it's at least a step in the first direction. And I guess I can ask the question of the solicitor. It's something I should have asked. If it's not going well, can a future board say, you know what, we want to get rid of that program? The referendum, the thing we just voted on, the referendum of the 0.5%. Say in 5 years the whole board changes and they're not in agreement about the referendum that we passed. They have to take another referendum to get rid of it, or they just take a vote and do away with it?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Tommy said that earlier.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. So
Because,
it takes
because
the
the
action.
board wouldn't pass the referendum, the voters would.
Yeah.
So it goes
The
back to
voters would have the
again.
opportunity.
So what you're doing is you're not voting, you're voting to place it on a ballot
Exactly.
for a vote by your residents that are going to vote on it, and they're going to vote it up or down, and you're bound by that vote, right? You're bound
Right,
by
and the only way it changes in the future
have to
is
run-
another separate referendum saying we like to get rid of that.
That's right.
Thank you.
Okay, so my point is, what's the rush, number one? And number two, Rick, you can give us a redacted copy of your inventory. Redact the names. Let us see, number 1 through 20, whatever, the acreage. That's it. You don't have to violate any confidences. Just redact the names. I mean, simple. It's all transparency. You're making a mistake. Thank you.
Jim, as always, I appreciate your comments. Is anybody else have any public comment for the motion that is on the floor? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. So this next one is going to be a real treat based on what we just had. So next up, we have a motion to execute an agreement of sale for the purchase of real estate.
Don't leave, folks. Don't leave. You'll be happy with this one.
Is that why Joe Nolan got to leave? I had to stay?
Yeah, that's right, you had to stay.
Mickey's back here, rather 1 foot out the door, Mickey. Maybe you're kicking John. I don't know.
Let me start. So
Sure.
there's a agreement of sale that we have with respect to the property at 3335 Fisher Road. It's under the name of Santomauro Farms, Santomauro Farms LLC, and Worcester Township. It's about 40.6 acres. The property would be proposed to be acquired for open space, park, and recreational purposes for the benefit of the citizens of Worcester and other appropriate public use. The terms and conditions of purchasing are the classic ones, where there's a due diligence period. In this case, we would be paying cash. Tommy's going to describe it in a minute. The agreement has been signed. It is for $2,045,000. Again, we get to do due diligence. There's closing that's scheduled following due diligence. And the other, it's in the LPD zoning district.
Yep.
And they're the highlights. And I'll let Tommy describe the balance.
For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, is the property directly behind Molly's Run, the dog kennel.
Right, and it's, so you understand, it's been signed, it's been negotiated and signed by the seller with us, and it's up to you to authorize execution of the agreement of sale following Tommy's presentation.
Okay, yeah, so we can, go ahead, Tommy. So we have some slides, and then we have a short video, and then we'll. So, as Steve mentioned, so geographically, it's 3335 Fisher Road, just north of 40 acres. It sits on the end of Fisher Road that is just past Molly's Run, where it's, you've got Morris on one side, you've got the Presbyterian Church at Wentz Run there. This is the property, a couple of steps in, if you will. Up on the top of the screen is Fisher Park, just to give you some framework. And this sort of sits, the Milestone development is sort of on the other side, and this is sort of in between that, geographically. Go ahead. So we've got a series of slides. This is from the southeast corner facing the northeast. So when you're on one corner of the property and you're looking back upon it, this is the green. This is from the main driveway looking into the property. There are 5 structures that are actually on the property. This is the barn. One of the structures goes back to the 1800s. I don't know that the barn is quite that old, but certainly a historic element to the barn as well. Let me catch up, Tommy. This is looking west on the property as you kind of move into the property. So it's 40 acres long and skinny, and this is sort of part way up if I have my slides correct. Similar part of the property, but looking northwest. So looking in another, and it all looks the same, but you're just getting different views of sort of as we move into the property. And this is from the northeast, from about the mid-property line, as I recall. And then this would be looking due east across the property. You can actually see there's some pico lines way off, sort of beyond, sort of at the edge of the property line that you can kind of make out on the picture. And this is from the front porch of the home that sits on the property presently, and there'd be decisions to be made regarding the structures in terms of that. And then now we have the southeast facing northwest, as I have my grid. So ultimately, those were pictures that sort of give you a circular view of the property that lay before us. Before Tommy does the video, I'm just going to add a couple quick comments. This started several months ago. You know, we've talked in the meetings many times about how tricky and discreet these things need to be, and how this, we had an opportunity, this property never went to market, ultimately, at the end of the day. So when you talk about, Steve's talking about 40 acres at $250,000 or $125,000 per acre, you know, you can do the math. You know,
51,000.
Correct, but when Jim was asking about the price of an acre to a developer, you're talking about an exponential difference. We had an opportunity to look at a piece of property that never went to market, which is why a committee doesn't do land acquisition. It's why you put us up here, ultimately, to represent your wishes, and hopefully we're representing the wishes of the majority of the township when we do these things, but you can't share, can't tell you these things are taking place. It's just the nature of the beast. That's not ideal, I know, for a resident. Hey, why are you doing this? But that's kind of how we have to go about doing it. We have a video that hopefully will run clean. This was with a drone, that you get just a view of the property and kind of how, and then we'll have discussion thereafter. I think it's a few minutes, right, Tommy? The drone was fine. It's the video footage that doesn't move as quickly as possible. But while you sort of looking at the, land acquisition is a tricky thing, and in terms of a resident that might want to discuss it, in terms of being able to, Steve said a couple of meetings ago, nothing's off the table when you have that. And we've had situations come before us as a board. It's just kind of how it happens. The reason we want to do it through an open space program and as discreetly as we can is so if somebody wants to have that conversation for an estate reason, or they want to have that conversation really just to kick the tires. Are you interested? Might you be interested? There's steps for us to follow, which, Bob advised us very well in terms of what we could and couldn't do. And what I'll ultimately say is we hear you when you say these things matter. We just can't always tell you what we're doing while it's happening. Is that fair, Bob? I mean,
Yeah, might as well.
Sure.
Well, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, we haven't, there's not a motion yet, but.
Protocol for this while we're watching movies together, so.
It's okay. So, did this person come to you because of the advertisement and that we started to talk about open space again and bringing it forward more? You don't believe so?
Yeah, I approached.
Okay.
Yeah, so it wasn't directly in correlation to the program that we've been talking about it, but it was seizing and seeing an opportunity and then bringing it to the board.
Tommy sits there, and this is something I said many years ago. I don't think this is where we got in trouble within the township, where you have the sitting board members negotiating with landowners. It's a problem. And the township got burned on that. And there was a lot of shady deals went on in the township for a number of years. It was a problem. The way it's set up is Mr. Ryan, people come in with building permits, he sees the transactions. Mr. Ryan approached the people, and he sees that. People come in to see Mr. Ryan, and he deals with that. Mr. Best doesn't get involved in it, Mr. Lello, or myself, because it becomes a problem then. And voila, as you talk about the golf course, that's why the golf course, those homes are on there. A supervisor did the deal, which was wrong, and we get stuck with all those homes down there. So we as a board sit here, we do things through Mr. Ryan. He negotiates with the people, he brings to the table. So it's worked out really well. To Mr. Ryan's credit, he did a good job with that.
Right. Well, we've been talking about having the preservation, the township take that back for almost a year.
Yep.
So that was my question. Not who brought it to us. It was, did this help that?
Yep.
And if it did, then you need to highlight that.
Yeah. Mr. Ryan knew the direction we were going in from the meetings and things, the conversations we've had as a board, and through some of the public comments. He felt the pulse of the people in the township, so when these things come up. But as I said, we have had some responses from the letter that went out, either from donations from people willing to contribute money or people willing to let the township look at their property. And we have to sit there as land acquisitioners and say, hey, we're interested in that property, it doesn't fit. Some of the things we get, it's just, they want us to give them money for something that's not really worth in the best interest of the township. And we try to be frugal with the township's money, so.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good video.
Tell us when you've seen enough of the farm, enough of the video.
It's green on green. I mean, certainly, we have a lot of green in Worcester, and this gives us an opportunity to get more, ultimately. And
Someone going to make a motion now while this is still playing? or you-
sure, we can do that.
I'll make a motion, we purchase, go through with the purchase of 3035 Mill Fisher Road.
Do you want to articulate some elements there, Bob, so we could?
Have something written down, but I think the motion would be to authorize execution of the agreement of sale between Worcester Township and Santa Muro Farms LLC to purchase the property at 3335 Fisher Road for a purchase price of $2,045,000 pursuant to the terms of the agreement of sale. So moved works.
I'll make that motion and
Did you say so moved?
so moved.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion that's on the floor? Okay, well, I got Susan and Jim. You can go in either way. It's fine with me.
I just want to say from a personal standpoint, I'm thrilled about this. And the person who purchased the property or owned the property seemed to have completely restored the barn. And I don't know what's happening, but those two buildings are included in the property, right? And a long, long time ago, when I was like in college, I wrote to the original owner of that property and said, if you ever want to sell, please let me know, because I would love to have kept it, a farm. So anyway, I'm thrilled about this. I think it's a great location, and it kind of keeps that whole Fisher Road area, open and beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Jim?
Jim Malik, Worcester. That's outstanding. That checks all the boxes. The value, what you paid for that property versus what its real value is, you got it at a discount. It's not steep slopes and all kinds of other features that would be a detriment. It's wide open. I mean, I think that's superb. That's the kind of stuff you should do, okay? My question is this property more like a Hebner Park kind of property, or is it more like a John Harris kind of property? and what I mean by that is, what kind of access do we have to the property as a township resident?
So I can tell you the intent is to make it accessible to residents. As Bob had said, how we might use it is an open question. One of the things we'll do is hand it to the Planning Commission to get some ideas. Do we turn it into a park? Do we leave it as just green space? But to your direct question, for residents, so residents could access it, not so you could just drive
Right.
by and look pretty.
Yeah, drive by and see video cameras, keep out, private property, that kind of stuff.
Excuse me.
This is going to be open to the public.
That would certainly be the intent, absolutely.
Right. So, and then will the grass be mowed so people can kind of walk through it, or will it be overgrown?
So there's a certain measure of maintenance that we'll need to do to the property, and then we'll make some decisions in terms of what we want it to look like. And certainly that's where residents can have input in terms of that.
A thought for you. Fields should be a consideration because at the school district, they are full. They can't schedule enough activities at the field. So I think should be considering soccer fields, ball fields, those kinds of things. 40 acres, I mean, you wouldn't even have to take a whole lot of it, but the lack of fields is a concern for a lot of the school district people, parents, families, kids, sports. So I think this is great. This is exactly the kind of stuff I'm talking about. If you're going to buy it, you can buy it now. You got the cash, and the price you paid for it. I mean, good job, Tommy, on your negotiations and getting this property, because that's good. You guys did good. Thanks.
Jim, I guess our fields are really abused. I mean, Julie used to make a presentation about the time and the grass recapturing. So really, it's flat. It's one of Mr. Ryan approached the board about being a flat piece of ground that he's hit all the time by needing parks and play areas and things like that. So it's something the township needs as it grows and more kids are doing things.
I mean, it's beautiful. I mean, that's how you do it, right there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Is there any other public comment regarding the motion that is on the floor? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Two claps in a night.
I'm glad I showed Nolan.
I told you you might have a role tonight.
Yep.
Okay, so moving forward. Next, we have a motion to accept the resignation of Stacy Crandell, the Assistant Township Manager. Maeve, just sort of piggyback on what you said earlier, she had an opportunity to sort of advance into a bigger role, and that unfortunately happens. So we always wish folks well when that's the case. It's a personnel matter, so we don't really discuss that other than we need to have a motion to accept the resignation.
I'll make a motion to accept the resignation of Stacy Crandall, Assistant Township Manager.
And I'll second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Moving forward, we have other business. Does anybody wish to bring any other business before the board at this time?
A couple of things. Mr. Lello, as we purchased it, I said we have to be fiscally responsible. We look at the budget to look at the amount of money being spent. The legal fees the township has, it's growing. One of the issues, our zoning board has a number of issues before them at the current time. I asked Mr. Ryan the other day, ballpark figure of what the township has spent, because people have said, how come the township's not doing anything regarding the Palmer property? We are. We have two lawyers. We have Mr. Brandt, his staff, as well as the zoning hearing board lawyer, that the township is funding all of it. So we have a pretty good legal team. And Mr. Ryan, we've spent in the ballpark of how much would you say so far? And it hasn't really, it's just starting.
$150,000.
$150,000. So we should probably have a legal defense fund for those things. And it's growing. We have to, as much as like Mr. Brandt, it's a problem with the legal funds. How do we go about that? The other issue is an issue I had a problem with the board 12 years ago is the growing greener ordinance. I questioned it when it was done. I said it'd be a problem, and it's turning out to be a big problem in the township. We had meetings here, the residents spoke, majority of the landowners were against the growing greener ordinance. Rob's shaking his head, but we sat here, the board, most of the people that own land, the largest landowner was Mrs., on Pot Shop Road, Mrs. Allen. She took it to court where it got stopped. So the landowners had a problem with it. The township is now having a problem with it because all the residents in that development, which was the test case, are coming to the township not once, but the second time looking for variances for their yards. Worcester was always a good place. They had a nice yard for the people to raise their kids and have a little pool in the backyard or have a tennis court. But the powers that be thought it'd be better that we have cluster homes where the homes are really tight with each other. The people in that development can't even put a swing set in their backyard or a little barbecue area. So they're coming to the township requesting variances. And the zoning hearing board has been fairly liberal with them so far. I think the lawyers, once again, I think he's buying a second house in Avalon with the money from the zoning hearing board. And Avalon's not a cheap place to be. I'm saying that because it's a situation the township has to look at. We don't have a leg to stand on. I guess the zoning hearing board, they do a good job looking at these situations, but the homes were built on 2-acre lots. That's why people moved into Worcester, because they could have a gathering in their backyard. These people can't have anything. There's no privacy there. And, you know, it's their problem. They're paying $1 million, $1.5 million for the house. Why they didn't realize that when they put the money up for the house to go out and look at the backyard. You know, it's a nice development, very big home on a postage stamp lot. But they're coming to the zoning hearing board, and they've been granting them variances. So we've just had a problem with the paving. Their driveways aren't big enough, so they're repaving their driveway. They're going out 5 or 10 feet, which is causing a problem. And Mr. Ryan's addressed it, but there's a little glitch in the writing of the law that allows them to do that. So the paved surfaces is becoming a bigger issue in their front yards. So that's going to be a problem coming forward. I'm just making you aware it's something the township has to address with the future development. Worcester always had nice lots where a person could enjoy themselves without having encroaching on their neighbor's privacy, and that privacy is becoming a big issue in that development as well. And I said that was a test case for the growing greener. So as you move forward, stay tuned for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Anything from you, Lou? Good, nope. Okay. We do have public comment. If everybody has exercised their public comments, that's great. But if anybody has any lasting comments that they would like to make, now would be the time. Does anybody have any final public comment for the board tonight? Seeing none, motion to adjourn. Thanks for coming, folks.